we're going to look at maturation. We're also going to look at how growth and development and maturation impact us as a coach and how we can behave and deal with these issues in our practices. It also may apply to if we're working in a sports development context or if we're actually programming and leading and managing sport. So it can be applied, and we need to have an awareness of all these things and how they impact the way that we work. So it's really important to take on board the key components and considerations as a coach, organiser or manager of sport. So firstly, maturation. As already looked at in the previous session, maturation is a process by which we change, grow, develop through lifetime. So what I'd like to do, just a little thinking exercise, think back from when you were young, when you were a child. Can you remember being physically small? How about, think about how you solved problems when you were very young. How did you go about things and how did you work? I bet it was probably a lot more simplistic compared to how you think of things out now. So if, spend a couple of minutes thinking in your mind about your childhood, how you grew and developed, and compare yourself to, maybe you compared yourself to others, or you maybe had trouble with certain things, and think about how, sport and external factors influenced you. So we're now going to focus on looking at maturation and influences on sport participation. So there's clear defined different levels of maturation. We're mainly going to focus on this kind of puberty period, but some of the principles that we discussed will apply to early childhood. So children can be categorised into 3 maturity groups according to how quickly they grow and reach maturation. So early maturers basically are those who mature, maturational ages are 1 year greater than their chronological age. It may be more than 1 year greater. So they're the early maturers. Late maturers are those who at maturational ages are 1 year less, more than 1 year less than their chronological ages. And then we've got the average. The average maturers are those whose maturational age is within 1 year of the chronological age. So we're about at the right level. There's no bad or good or positive or negative to whether you're, early or late maturers, but the way people act and respond to you may influence your experiences, which we're going to touch on into this session. Youth sport leaders should pay particular attention to early and late maturing girls and boys, because these are the maturational groups that have distinct characteristics that can be an advantage or a disadvantage to them as young athletes. So as I said, we're going to touch on these points as we go through this presentation. So the following descriptions are generalisations based on typical maturational patterns, as all adolescents do not follow these categorisations exactly. So these are just some key points that have been gathered together which generalise. They're not specific for every individual, there may be slight variations, but the key points are important. So looking at the early maturing boys, early maturing boys are taller and heavier with more muscle mass and greater shoulder girth. Advantage, so they may have better static strength and arm pull, the shuttle run speed and agility and explosive strength in the vertical jump compared to a late or average maturer. These boys are often able to outperform peers in youth sport activities because of their early success. Early maturing boys receive a lot of recognition, which fuels their confidence, self-esteem, motivation to continue and stay in sport. There's been lots of research been done in this area, and if you're an early maturer, often you'll find that more time is invested in you because you are identified as talented because you're quicker, faster, stronger. This may not be the case. There may be people who are just as talented but they just haven't grown into their bodies yet. However, on the flip side of this, early maturing boys and girls tend to end up as shorter adults, so they have their growth spurts early and grow less. Again, this is a generalisation. Early maturers stop growing in stature first, and children in the other 2 maturity categories continue to grow for a longer period of time and are often end up being taller adults. Early maturing boys and girls have on average greater body weight and also greater weight for height as adults than others. So to the kind of other maturity groups. So the physiques of these, going back to the kind of that somatotype, is the mesomorphic, the muscular, or endomorphic, the round and heavy shaped individuals. Continuing on, early maturing boys are caught up with, so as later maturing boys catch up with their biological maturation, it's frequently hard for the early maturers to understand that their biological advantage is obviously now disappeared and gone, and they sometimes find it difficult to cope with that. Because early maturing boys are stronger and bigger, they may fail to learn the fundamental movement skills or fundamental skills that are needed to be successful and develop those advanced skills. So they've used their athleticness and their build to rather than actually develop skills. So you'll often find as other kids then grow and develop, they may be more skillful because they've had to be skillful because they haven't had that strength and speed as the early maturers have. Coaches need to be aware of the catch up and basically support maturers during this period. It could be quite I guess difficult in terms of if you were once the best and then if everyone's kind of grown and now you're not as good as, or people are overtaking you in terms of that performance level. So there's kind of some psychological and internal things you may as a coach have to deal with kids who are early maturers. Coaches should emphasise personal mastery approach with individual performance goals for these boys, and then should allow them to rely on short-term biological advantage. So again, it's around making sure they don't just focus on that strength and speed, but they also still practice and develop their skills to ensure that they have success. Coaches should avoid pigeonholing prepubescent athletes into certain positions. As I said, things may change, so you may be put in a position 3-4 years down the line. There may be other kids who are more suited to that position at that time, so it's making sure that everyone gets a range of experiences in whichever sport that they're involved in, especially in team sports. Okay, so we focused on the early maturing boys. What about the late maturing boys? Obviously, as I went through the early maturing boys, I mentioned some of the things that apply to the boys also applies to girls, so I'll touch on this as I go through. Late maturing boys are more linear in build with physiques called ectomorphic. So again, referring back to the somatotyping. The boys are typically not as successful in early youth sport experiences because they are not as physically strong or mature, and thus at a biological disadvantage in sport activities that require strength and power. Often late maturing boys are teased due to their lack of body shape or sporting body, and their lack of success in popular team sports. They may become disencouraged or demotivated and may even drop out of sport as a result of this. So it's really important as a coach and an organiser of sport to continue to provide competent and instruction and skill development from late maturers, and not assume as they're not as good as those early maturing boys just because their maturation is behind or their physical performance is a disadvantage. This is only a temporary disadvantage. We need to remember that. It's also important to match your athletes in terms of age, size, maturation, skill level. So as a coach, when we're delivering or organising sport, we need to make sure we look at our individuals in our group and look at the sizes and try and match in terms of those key areas: age, size, maturation and skill level, not just put them all in age groups, which often happens. Matching athletes by maturation levels and modifying practice and structures when mismatches are apparent are recommended, because obviously coaching practice need to protect those smaller late maturing athletes from injury. You put a really small late maturer into an early maturer in a kind of sport where there's forces applied, or a competitive situation where they're going to have to compete against each other, we're going to have a detrimental effect against those late maturing athletes. Continuing on, late maturing boys tend to be taller adults. Research has shown that the motor performance in late maturing boys improved from 18 to 30 years of age, whereas the early and average maturers tend to show little change or even a decline. So again, as a late maturer, you may improve in skill as you get older. This research emphasised the continued maturation and enhancement of motor performance of late maturing beyond the typical age limits of adolescence. So we still may, as a late maturer, continue to develop into our 20s. So it's really important, our challenge as a youth sport leader or coach is to make sure we educate coaches, ensure that parents and our young athletes understand the differences between that late maturation, and so that they're not feeling like they are disadvantaged and are put off from sport.